It hid in the darkness of Moria for thousands of years, and would not only slay one, but two kings of Khazad-dûm. The terror of Moria, the Balrog known as Durin's Bane. Today on Council of the Rings, we'll explore the fascinating history of the Balrog of Moria. The first age ended with the War of Wrath, where Morgoth was defeated and sent into the void. Many of the Balrogs that had fought under him survived, and would hide in the darkness at the roots of the earth. And one of these Balrogs would hide in the roots of the Misty Mountains, beneath the mountains of Khazad-dûm. He remained undisturbed throughout the Second Age, and most of the Third. In 1980, the dwarves delved deep at the time, mining for mithril beneath Barasinba. It was a metal beyond price that was becoming yearly harder to win, and so one day they awoke or released the dreadful terror that had been hiding beneath the mountain, a Balrog of Morgoth. The Balrog wreaked havoc in Khazad-dûm and slay many of the dwarves caught off guard. The king, Durin VI, also fell to the demon, but the dwarves would try to avenge him. For killing the king, it became known as Durin's Bane. Durin's son Nain became the new king of Khazad-dûm. At the time, the dwarves were unaware that it was a Balrog, and only referred to the demon as the Terror or Durin's Bane. The dwarves attempted to fight the Balrog, but his power was far too great. Despite their efforts to hold Khazad-dûm against it, King Nain and many of the dwarves were killed the following year in 1981, and thus Nain was the last true king of Khazad-dûm in the Third Age. The glory of the kingdom passed, and its people were destroyed or fled far away. Most of the dwarves that survived fled north to the Grey Mountains. They were led under Nain's son, Thrain I, and 18 years later, Thrain would come to the Lonely Mountain and found a kingdom under the mountain. The terror the Balrog spread in Moria would also affect the Sylvan Elves of Lorien. Many of them fled south, including Amroth and Nimrodil, that tragically died the same year in 1981. For 500 years Moria was left to the Balrog. He was acquainted to the ancient tunnels delved by the mysterious nameless things underneath Moria, creatures said to be older than Sauron that preferred to dwell in the darkness, and described as slimier than fish. Not even the dwarves had ever chanced to come upon them. Around 2480, orcs began to make secret strongholds in the Misty Mountains to block all of the passes. Sauron began to send some of his creatures to Moria, including many orcs. The Balrog allowed the orcs and trolls to remain in Moria, but they feared him greatly. It is unknown whether the Balrog knew about Sauron being a new Dark Lord, or if he would submit. In any case, he served Sauron's purposes indirectly. In 2790, many of the dwarves had fled from the destruction of Smaug, and now lived in Dunland. Thror, now old, poor, and desperate, gave to his son Thrain the one great treasure he still possessed, the last of the 7 rings. And then he went away with one old companion called Nar. He was a little crazed, perhaps, with age and misfortune, and long brooding on the splendor of Moria in his forefathers' days. Or the ring, it may be, was turning to evil now that its master was awake, driving him to folly and destruction. From Dunland he went north with Nar, and they crossed the Redhorn Pass and came down into Asanulbisar, or Dimril Dale, as it was called in the tongue of men. When Thror came to Moria, the gate was open. Nar begged him to beware, but he took no heed of him, and walked proudly in as an heir that returns. But he did not come back. Many days later, Azog would come out with the head of Thror, and sent Nar away with a few golden coins. As Nar fled down the Silver Lode, he looked back once, and saw that the orcs had come from the gate, and were hacking up the body of Thror, and flinging the pieces to the Black Crows. This Nar would report to the dwarves, and the war between dwarves and orcs began. It lasted from 2793 to 2799, and was mostly fought beneath the Misty Mountains. The war ended with the climactic battle of Asanulbisar. It took place before the Great Gate of Moria, and was a victory for the dwarves, but costly. The dwarves did not conquer Moria, however. Dane Ironfoot avenged Thror and his own father Nain by killing Azog in front of the gate, but no feast nor song was there that night, for the dead were beyond the count of grief. Barely half of their number, it said, could still stand or had hope of healing. Thrain II wanted to take Khazad-dûm after the battle, but the dwarves refused. Some were from other houses of the dwarves, and had no intention of settling in Khazad-dûm. Then Thrain turned to Dane and said, "But surely my own kin will not desert me." "No," said Dane. "You are the father of our folk, and we have bled for you, and will again. But we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm. Only I have looked through the shadow of the gate, Beyond the shadow, it waits for you still. Durin's Bane. The world must change, and some other power than ours must come before Durin's folk walk again in Moria. And so Khazad-dûm was left untouched by the dwarves, despite the victory. Durin's Bane remained a menace in the ancient kingdom of the dwarves, whose nature was still hidden to the outside world. In 2845, Thrain was captured by the servants of Sauron and brought to Dol Guldur. Here the ring of Durin was taken from him. Gandalf would look for him, and feared he had entered Moria. He travelled to the East Gate, and entered alone. In Moria Gandalf searched long for Thrain, and it was here that he encountered some of the nameless things, as he explains to the Fellowship, though he would not describe it in full detail. Gandalf did not encounter the Balrog, however. Perhaps it was luck, perhaps not. Gandalf led through the West Gate, which didn't have a lake before it at the time, nor the hideous monster called the Watcher in the Water. Later we know Aragorn also travelled to Moria at least once, also through the East Gate. We don't know exactly when, but it couldn't have been before 2952. We know little of what he saw, as he refused to tell it to the Fellowship. But though I came out again, the memory is very evil. I do not wish to enter Moria a second time. I highly doubt he saw the Balrog. There seems to be little evidence for that at least. In 2989, Balin would try to recolonize Moria, but as many of you know, the dwarves were attacked and killed by the orcs. It's unknown if the dwarves saw Durin's Bane, but if they did, it's not something we learn from the Book of Masabul. In the film, Gandalf says that a shadow moves in the dark, which implies the dwarves did see the Balrog or feel its presence. But this line is only in the films, and not something you can find in the Fellowship of the Ring. In January of 3019, the Fellowship of the Ring would enter Moria through the West Gate and discover the fate of Balin and his expedition. The company reached the Bridge of Khazad-dûm on the 15th. There they encountered the terrible Balrog. Legolas instantly recognized it as a Balrog, while Gimli dropped his axe in awe, knowing it was Durin's Bane. At once Gandalf warned the others that this creature was beyond them, commanding them to leave while he faced it alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on his staff in his left hand, but in his other hand Glumdring gleamed, cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward, slowly on the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still, Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small, and altogether alone, grey and bent, like a wizened tree before the onset of the storm. From out of the shadow, a red sword leaped flaming. Glumdring glittered white in answer. There was a rising clash, and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil!" he shouted. "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment, Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained, poised, quivering, like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunked down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and hurled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone. Neither Gandalf nor the Balrog were killed by the fall. For 8 days, Gandalf pursued the creature, and would climb the endless stair to the peak of Sirac Sigil. It led to Durin's tower, and here they fought for 3 days and 2 nights. In the end, the Balrog was cast down, and his body broke the mountainside as it fell. Gandalf himself died after that, but was later sent back to Middle-earth with even greater powers as Gandalf the White. And thus ended the days of the Balrog of Moria. It's interesting to think that Aragorn most likely went to Moria before Balin's expedition did. Did this surprise you? Let me know in the comments. If you like what I do here on the channel, you can support by becoming a member or join through Patreon. There's a lot of cool stuff being posted on Patreon, so make sure to check it out. Special thanks to all the current supporters of the channel. You truly make a difference, so thank you very much. As always, thank you all for watching and being part of the Council of the Rings. Farewell till next time.